almost all of its history, this was one of the hardest places on Earth for an outsider to reach. To get here, you had to cross the highest mountains on the planet, the Himalayas, a wall of rock and ice that seals off an entire region of the world. You had to climb onto a vast, freezing plateau so high and so vast that it is called, without exaggeration, the roof of the world. An expanse the size of Western Europe, sitting nearly 5 kilometers above the sea, where the air holds so little oxygen that the unprepared can die of the altitude alone. You had to travel for weeks or months across some of the emptiest and most punishing land there is, over passes higher than any peak in the Alps, through cold that could kill, along tracks where the only traffic was yak caravans and pilgrims. And even then, for centuries, you were forbidden. This was a closed country, one that guarded its isolation fiercely. Foreigners were turned back at the borders, the rare, determined explorers who tried to slip through in disguise to be the first outsider to reach the fabled Forbidden City, were almost always caught and turned back, and a great many never made it at all, dying of the cold, the altitude, or the sheer distance. For the Western imagination especially, this only deepened the spell. Lhasa became the ultimate symbol of the remote, the hidden, the unreachable, a mysterious holy city ruled by a god-king, sealed behind the highest mountains on Earth, that almost no outsider had ever laid eyes on. It was the very definition of the ends of the earth. Explorers dreamed of it. Adventurers died trying to reach it. And for the Tibetans themselves, that isolation was not a misfortune, but a kind of protection, a wall of mountains and distance and cold that kept the outside world, and its armies and its ideas at bay, and let them build undisturbed. A civilization dedicated almost entirely to the life of the spirit. And at the very heart of that forbidden land, in a high valley on the roof of the world, there was a city, a holy city. Its name means, in Tibetan, place of the gods. And rising above it, on a hill in the middle of the valley, stood one of the most extraordinary buildings human beings have ever made, a vast white and red palace. 13 stories high, 1,000 rooms, climbing the hillside like something grown from the rock itself, its golden roofs blazing in the thin, brilliant sunlight of the high plateau. A building that was, all at once, a fortress, a palace, a monastery, a treasury, a tomb, and the seat of a god who ruled as a king. For this was a place unlike anywhere else on earth, a land governed, for centuries, not by a normal king or emperor, but by a line of Buddhist spiritual masters, each believed to be the reincarnation of the one before, and the living embodiment of compassion itself. A country ruled by a god king, from that palace, on that hill, in that hidden city, above the clouds. So here is a place that has stood, for the whole world, as the ultimate symbol of the remote and the spiritual. A holy city on the roof of the world, ruled by a god king, sealed off behind the highest mountains on earth, closer to heaven than any capital that has ever existed. A city where, until living memory, perhaps a quarter of all the men were monks, where the calendar was a cycle of festivals and prayer, where the government itself was a religion, and the ruler was believed to be compassion returned to earth in human form. There has never been another city quite like it, and there may never be again. And here, in the same breath, is a city and a people caught, in our own time, in one of the most sensitive and contested political struggles on the planet. A place whose ancient identity is now the subject of a quiet, enormous, and painful contest over its very soul, watched by the whole world and settled by no one. Both of those things are true at the same time. Neither one is an exaggeration. And that is the question this high, thin-aired, sacred city forces upon us, the question at the heart of everything you are about to see. What happens to the most spiritual, most isolated, most otherworldly place on earth when the modern world finally arrives, with its roads and its railways, its migrants and its money, its politics and its power? Can a civilization built entirely around faith, on the roof of the world, survive its own opening to the century? Come with us now, up onto the roof of the world, to the place of the gods, and we will try to understand one of the most extraordinary and most fragile cities that human beings have ever built. This is Lhasa. To understand Lhasa, you have to begin with the plateau, because nowhere else on Earth is a place so completely shaped by where it sits. The Tibetan Plateau is one of the great geographical facts of the planet. It is an enormous expanse of high ground, around 2.5 million square kilometers, roughly the size of Western Europe, lifted, on average, more than 4,000 meters into the sky. It was born of one of the slowest, most colossal collisions in the history of the Earth, the drift of the Indian landmass northward into Asia, crumpling the ground between them upward over tens of millions of years, throwing up the Himalayas along its southern edge, and lifting the whole plateau behind them. It is still rising, a fraction of a millimeter a year, as the continents keep pressing together beneath it, and that altitude changes everything. Up here, the air is thin. At Lhasa's height of around 3,650 meters, there is only about 2/3 as much oxygen as at sea level, enough to leave a newly arrived visitor breathless, dizzy, and pounding with headache for days as their body struggles to adjust. The sun is fierce and close, burning through the thin atmosphere, so that Lhasa is one of the sunniest cities in the world, bathed in a hard, brilliant, high-altitude light. The nights are cold, the winters bitter. And the plateau is dry, a high, cold desert of grassland and rock and snow-capped peaks swept by wind, where trees struggle to grow and the horizon is ringed, always by mountains. This is a land that shapes its people at the level of the body itself. Tibetans are one of the most remarkable examples of human adaptation on the planet, their bodies genetically tuned over thousands of years to thrive in air that would leave a lowlander gasping. They breathe more efficiently, their blood carries oxygen differently, and they can labor and thrive at altitudes where visitors can barely climb a flight of stairs, a gift they may have inherited, scientists now believe, in part from an ancient, now vanished branch of the human family that lived on or near the plateau long ago, and whose genes for surviving in thin air still run in Tibetan blood today. It is one of the fastest and most striking examples of human evolution ever discovered, a whole people shaped, in their very selves, by the roof of the world. They built a whole civilization where almost no one else could live at all. At the center of it stood the yak, those great shaggy, high-altitude cattle, superbly adapted to the cold and the thin air that gave the Tibetans almost everything: milk and butter and cheese, meat and wool and leather, dung dried for the only fuel in a treeless land, and the muscle to plow the high fields and carry loads across passes higher than any mountain in Europe. A Tibetan family's wealth was once counted in yaks, and around the yak, the Tibetans built a spare, hardy, self-sufficient way of life, herding on the high grasslands and growing barley, the one grain tough enough to ripen in the short, cold, high-altitude growing season in the sheltered valleys. That barley, roasted and ground into a flour called tsampa, has been the staff of Tibetan life forever, kneaded together with the other great staple of the plateau, butter tea, that strange and sustaining brew of tea, boiled and churned with salt and yak butter, drunk cup after cup through the day, replacing the salt, fat, and warmth a body burns through fighting the cold and the height. To a visitor, it can taste more like a thin soup than a tea. To a Tibetan, it is life itself. And Lhasa itself sits in one of the plateau's rare gifts, a relatively low, broad, sheltered valley, low, of course, only by the standards of the roof of the world, still higher than almost any city on Earth. Watered by a river, the Ki, a tributary of the great Yarlung Tsangpo, which is itself the upper course of the mighty Brahmaputra, one of the great rivers of Asia, rising here on the plateau before plunging down, eventually, through the deepest gorge on the planet, to the plains of India. A river valley, a little lower and warmer and greener than the surrounding heights, where barley could grow and willows and poplars could take root and a city could rise. Water and shelter and a little warmth, in a land that offers almost none of them. That is why, of all the places on the vast plateau, a great city grew here. hold on to that valley and to the sacred river that runs through it, because everything that follows was built along its banks. The story of Lhasa as a holy city begins, as so many things in this land do, with a king and a marriage around 1400 years ago. In the 7th century, at the same time that Islam was being born in Arabia and Europe was deep in its early Middle Ages, a powerful warrior king named Songtsen Gampo united the tribes of the Tibetan plateau into a single, formidable empire. An empire that would, at its height, become one of the great powers of Asia, its armies ranging across Central Asia. Strong enough to raid the capital of Tong China itself, to contend with the mightiest states of the age, and to control long stretches of the Silk Road. This was Tibet not as a remote spiritual backwater, but as a military superpower of the medieval world. And this king moved his capital to the valley of Lhasa, choosing the Red Hill for his fortress, and it is with him that the city truly begins. And it was Songtsen Gampo who took the step that would define Tibet forever. Through his marriages, including, by tradition, to a princess from Nepal and, most famously, to Princess Wenqing of the Chinese Tang court, he opened Tibet to Buddhism. Each of these brides, the tradition holds, arrived carrying a precious sacred statue of the Buddha as part of her dowry. And with them came the new faith, flowing into Tibet from two directions at once, from India to the south, the homeland of the Buddha, and from China to the east. Before this, the Tibetans had followed their own ancient religion, a world of local gods and mountain spirits and powerful shamans called Ben, deeply rooted in the land itself. Buddhism did not sweep this away overnight. It took root slowly, contested at first, and over the following centuries, it fused with the older beliefs, absorbing their gods and their magic, until it became something entirely and unmistakably Tibetan, a rich, deep, mystical, and elaborate form of the faith, unlike Buddhism anywhere else in the world, full of ritual and philosophy and art, of protector deities and demons and enlightened masters, of intricate symbolism and profound meditation that would come to shape every single aspect of life on the plateau, from birth to death and, Tibetans believe, far beyond. To house the sacred statue that Princess Wenqing had brought, a figure of the Buddha as a young man, believed to have been blessed by the Buddha himself and considered the most precious object in all of Tibet, the king built a temple in the heart of Lhasa, the Jokang. There is a legend that the site had to be chosen with great care, that the whole landscape of Tibet was understood as a great demoness lying on her back who had to be pinned down by temples built at key points on her body, and that the Jokang was raised over her very heart, on a lake that was filled in to build it. Whatever the truth of the legend, the Jokang still stands today in the old center of the city, and it remains the single holiest site in all of Tibetan Buddhism, holier even than the Potala. 1,400 years of unbroken devotion have worn its stone floors smooth and hollow, and blackened its ancient beams with the smoke of countless butter lamps. And around it, day and night, flows one of the most moving sights in the entire religious world, the pilgrims. They come from all over the plateau, some having traveled for months, and they circle the sacred temple in a slow clockwise flow of prayer, many of them not walking, but prostrating, standing, raising their hands above their heads, then dropping to their knees and throwing themselves full length, face down, onto the ground, stretching out completely, then rising and stepping forward only to the point their fingertips reached, and prostrating again and again and again, measuring out the entire circuit of the temple, and sometimes journeys of hundreds of kilometers across the plateau to reach it, with the length of their own bodies. Their foreheads grow calloused from touching the ground. Their hands are protected by wooden blocks or scraps of leather aprons protect their bodies. Their faces are weathered dark by the high-altitude sun, and their expressions are absorbed in a devotion so complete, so unself-conscious, that it stops the outsider in their tracks. This is not a performance, and it is not a museum. It is one of the most intensely living centers of faith left anywhere on earth. Hold that image of the circling, prostrating pilgrims. because it is the deepest truth of Lhasa, deeper than any palace, older than any politics, and still, after 1400 years, utterly alive. But the building that the whole world pictures when it thinks of Lhasa came much later, and it belongs to the most extraordinary institution in Tibetan history, the line of the Dalai Lamas. To understand it, you have to understand a belief at the heart of Tibetan Buddhism: reincarnation. Tibetans believe that all beings are reborn, life after life, driven by the momentum of their actions, but that certain great spiritual masters, having advanced far toward enlightenment, can choose, consciously and out of compassion, to be reborn again and again, deliberately returning to the world to keep helping others. Such a reborn master is called a tulku, and Tibetan Buddhism developed an extraordinary system around this belief. When a great tulku dies, a search begins for the child in whom he has been reborn. A child born around the time of the master's death, identified through oracles, dreams, visions, signs in the sky and on the land, the interpretation of the direction of the smoke from the cremation, and finally tests, in which the small child is presented with a mix of objects and must correctly pick out the possessions of his previous incarnation from among decoys. When the tests are passed and the omens agree, the child is recognized, enthroned, and raised and educated to take up again the role he held in his former life. It is a way of passing spiritual authority down the generations utterly unlike anything in the Western world. A line of succession based not on blood, not on election, but on rebirth. Over the centuries, the most important of all these reincarnation lineages became that of the Dalai Lama. Tibetans believe the Dalai Lama to be the earthly embodiment of Avalokiteshvara, in Tibetan, Chenrezig, the Buddha of infinite compassion, the very spirit of mercy, who out of boundless love for suffering beings, returns to the world again and again in human form. The title Dalai Lama means, roughly, ocean of wisdom. He is not a god in the Western sense, and not exactly a pope. The closest thing one can say is that he is understood as compassion itself, made flesh, generation after generation, to lead and to teach. Each Dalai Lama is the same continuing being, reborn. The 14th today is understood to be the same enlightened presence as the first, returning for the 14th time. And in the 17th century, the fifth of these Dalai Lamas, a brilliant, formidable, politically gifted figure, known ever after as the Great Fifth, did something that changed Tibet forever. With the crucial military backing of a powerful Mongol ally, he brought the whole plateau under his authority and became not only its supreme spiritual leader, but its temporal ruler as well, the God King, holding both the crown and the faith in a single pair of hands. Tibet became a theocracy, a state ruled directly by its religion and its reincarnate master, an arrangement almost unique in the modern world. And to be the seat of this new God King, and a monument worthy of a living Buddha, the Great Fifth ordered the building of the palace on the sacred Red Hill in the middle of Lhasa, where the fortress of Songtsen Gampo had stood 1,000 years before. So large was the undertaking that it was not finished in his lifetime, and, famously, his death was concealed for years by his regent, so that work on the great palace would not falter, the God King's passing hidden from his own people until his tomb within the palace was ready to receive him. They called it the Potala, named for the mythical mountain paradise of Avalokiteshvara himself, and it is one of the wonders of the world. It rises more than 130 meters up the Red Hill, 13 stories of massive, sloping, whitewashed, and dark red walls, built of stone and rammed earth and timber, climbing the hillside so that palace and hill seem to have become one single thing. The walls are enormously thick at the base, tapering as they rise, some of them filled with molten copper poured in to help the structure withstand the earthquakes of this geologically restless land. No steel, no modern engineering, just stone, earth, wood, and the accumulated genius of Tibetan builders, raising the highest ancient palace on the face of the earth by hand, at an altitude where every load carried and every step climbed costs the body dearly. Inside are more than 1,000 rooms, chapels and prayer halls and living quarters and vast storerooms, libraries holding tens of thousands of ancient scriptures, some written in ink of powdered gold, and thousands of shrines and statues and murals covering nearly every surface. A treasury of Tibetan art built up over centuries. It is divided into two great parts, and their colors tell you their purpose. The White Palace, painted in whitewash, housed the government offices, the assembly halls, and the private living quarters of the Dalai Lama, the worldly business of the state. And at its heart rises the Red Palace, painted deep ochre red, devoted entirely to religion and to the dead, for within it stand the tombs of the Dalai Lamas themselves. These are not ordinary tombs. They are great golden reliquary stupas, rising through multiple floors of the building, containing the embalmed bodies of past god kings. The largest, the tomb of the great fifth who built the palace, soars nearly 15 meters high and is covered in something approaching 4,000 kilograms of solid gold, encrusted with thousands of pearls, diamonds, turquoise, coral, and amber. One of the most valuable single objects ever created by human hands, sealed inside a palace on a hill at the top of the world. Try to picture what this building was. It was the parliament and the palace and the great cathedral and the crown jewels and the royal tombs, all fused into one colossal structure, on a hill at the top of the world. It was where the god king lived, ruled, worshipped, and would finally be entombed. From its highest windows and golden rooftops, the Dalai Lama could look out over his holy city spread across the valley below, and beyond it to the whole ring of sacred snow-capped mountains that walled off his kingdom from the world. It was the physical center of an entire civilization, the place where heaven, in the Tibetan imagination, pressed closest to the earth. For 3 centuries, the Potala was the beating heart of Tibet, and the destination toward which every pilgrim on the plateau turned. And around this sacred center, over the centuries, Lhasa grew into one of the most remarkable cities on earth, a city like nowhere else, where the sacred and the everyday were woven together at every step. By tradition, an astonishing share of the male population of Old Tibet became monks, at times perhaps 1 in every 4 or 5 men, one of the highest proportions of any society in history. To have a son enter a monastery was a source of deep honor for a family and an act of merit, and for many boys, it was also the only path to education and learning that existed. Around Lhasa rose 3 enormous monasteries, Drepung, Sera, and Ganden, the 3 great seats that were less like abbeys than like monastic cities, each housing thousands upon thousands of monks, together forming one of the greatest concentrations of religious life anywhere in the world. Drepung, before the modern era, may have been the largest monastery on the planet, a whole white city of temples and colleges and monks' quarters climbing a hillside outside Lhasa, home to something like 10,000 monks at its height, more than the population of many a European town of the age. These were the universities of Tibet, and they were serious ones. Tibetan Buddhism is not only ritual and devotion, it is one of the most intellectually rigorous religious traditions in the world, with a vast philosophical literature and a demanding, decades-long course of study. A monk might spend 20 years working toward the highest degrees of Buddhist philosophy, mastering logic, metaphysics, epistemology, and the subtle analysis of the nature of mind and reality. And the heart of that training is debate. In the monastery courtyards, to this day, you can watch the monks debate, one standing, one seated, the standing monk posing a challenge and then bringing his hands together in a sharp, dramatic clap to punctuate his point and demand an answer. A whole courtyard full of them going at once, a storm of clapping and argument and laughter, philosophy practiced as a full contact sport. It is one of the most electric things to witness in all of Lhasa, the life of the mind, pursued with total intensity in the thin, bright air, in a tradition passed down unbroken for centuries. The monasteries were also the storehouses of Tibetan art and learning, of the exquisite religious paintings called thangkas, of medicine and astronomy and calendar making, of the great libraries of hand-copied scripture, of the elaborate sand mandalas that monks build grain by colored grain over days or weeks, and then, in a final teaching about impermanence, sweep away in an instant. To lose a monastery was not only to lose a building. It was to lose a library, a university, a museum, and a living community of knowledge, all at once. Hold that in mind, because much of it would, in the 20th century, be lost. And the faith did not live only in the great buildings and the philosophy of the monks. It lived in the rhythm of the year, in the great festivals that gathered the whole city into celebration. There was the Tibetan New Year, Lhasa, when families cleaned their homes, made offerings, and the monasteries performed the great mass dances, the cham, monks in magnificent silk robes and huge, fierce, carved masks of protector deities and demons whirling in slow, thunderous, hypnotic circles to the crash of cymbals and the roar of the long horns, driving out the evil of the old year. There was the great prayer festival, when tens of thousands of monks and pilgrims flooded into Lhasa. There were the days when an enormous religious painting, a thanka the size of a hillside, was unrolled down the face of a slope for the crowds to venerate. There were the butter sculptures, intricate and colorful images molded from yak butter by the monks, and the 10,000 butter lamps lit in the temples, their soft golden light and rich smell filling the sacred halls. Faith here was not a private matter or a weekly observance. It was the very shape of time, the calendar of the year, the texture of every ordinary day, spun on every prayer wheel, muttered in every mantra, fluttering from every rooftop, woven into the food and the songs and the greetings and the deaths of an entire people. That is what it meant for a civilization to be built, wholly and completely, around a faith. And the city that grew below the Potala and around the Jokong was a place of pilgrims and merchants, monks and nobles, traders from Mongolia and China and India and the Himalayan kingdoms, all mingling in its markets and its narrow whitewashed streets. At its heart ran the Barkor, the sacred circuit around the Jokong temple, which was at once the holiest pilgrimage path in the city and its greatest marketplace. To walk the Barkor is to move in a slow, clockwise river of humanity, the direction of Buddhist devotion, and it has always been two things at once, a prayer and a bazaar. Pilgrims prostrating toward the temple move alongside stalls piled with prayer wheels and prayer beads, turquoise and coral and amber, blocks of tea and yak butter, bolts of cloth, incense, silver, and religious images. Old women spin handheld prayer wheels as they walk. Monks in deep maroon robes thread through the crowd, nomads down from the high grasslands, their faces dark and weathered, their hair braided with turquoise, gaze at the temple they have traveled for weeks to reach. The whole sensory world of old Lhasa gathered here. The air was thick with the smell of juniper smoke, burned as incense in great kilns, and of the butter lamps that burn by the thousand in the temples, and of yak butter and tea and unwashed wool and human crowds. Prayer flags snapped from every rooftop in their 5 colors, each flutter a prayer released to the wind. Great copper prayer wheels, some as tall as a person, were set turning by the hands of passing pilgrims, each turn sending its written prayers out into the world. And the deep, rolling, subterranean sound of the long temple horns and the chanting of monks rolled out across the flat roofs of the whitewashed city, morning and evening, a sound like the breathing of the earth itself. And over it all presided the Potala, immense and serene on its red hill, its golden roofs catching the fierce high-altitude sun, visible from everywhere in the valley, the still center around which the entire spinning world of Lhasa turned. For the pilgrims who had crossed the terrible plateau to reach it, walking or prostrating for weeks or months through some of the harshest country on earth, the first distant sight of that palace rising above the valley must have felt like arriving at the very threshold of heaven. Many wept at the sight of it. Some had given their whole lives and their whole fortunes to make the journey once. This was the center of their world, the place all their prayers had pointed toward, and it was more beautiful and more overwhelming than anything they had imagined. Step away from the temples for a moment out onto the plateau that surrounds the holy city, because the natural world here is as extraordinary and as sacred as anything human hands have built. This is a harsh and beautiful land, a high, thin, luminous world of enormous skies and distances, of turquoise, sacred lakes set against snow peaks, of grasslands rolling to the horizon under some of the clearest air on Earth. The light here is extraordinary, hard and pure and close, and the sacred lakes of the plateau, vast, still, intensely blue, and turquoise sheets of water at altitudes where no lake has any business being so beautiful, are among the holiest places in all of Tibet, ringed by pilgrims who walk for days around their shores. And the plateau is home to some of the rarest and most remarkable wildlife on the planet, animals found nowhere else, adapted like the Tibetans themselves to the roof of the world. There are wild yaks, huge and shaggy and formidable, the untamed cousins of the herded ones. There is the graceful Tibetan antelope, hunted nearly to oblivion for the wool of its fine underfur, and now slowly recovering under protection. There is the kiang, the wild ass of the high plains, running in herds across the endless grass. And there is the elusive snow leopard, the gray ghost of the high mountains, moving unseen across the peaks and ridges. The supreme and almost mythical predator of the heights. And wheeling high over the monasteries and the mountainsides is the great bird of the plateau's spiritual life, the vulture. For in Tibet, in a land where wood for cremation fires is desperately scarce, and the ground is often frozen too hard to dig a grave, the traditional way of honoring the dead is the sky burial. In this sacred ritual, the body of the deceased is carried to a special site on the mountainside and given, with prayer and ceremony, to the vultures, returned to the cycle of life in a final act of generosity. The body that the soul has finished with feeding other living things one last time before the person's rebirth. To an outsider, it can seem shocking, even disturbing, but it flows directly and beautifully from the deepest beliefs of this land, the impermanence of the body, which is only a temporary vessel, the compassion owed to all living things, even in death, and the endless turning of the wheel of life and death, in which nothing is wasted and nothing truly ends. In the Tibetan understanding, there is no more fitting or generous way to leave the world. But if one creature is the very soul of the high Tibetan wilderness, it is the black-necked crane, the only crane in the world that lives its entire life at high altitude, breeding on the remote marshy wetlands of the plateau in summer and moving to its sheltered valleys, including the Lhasa Valley, in winter. Tall and elegant, silver gray with a graceful black neck and a small crimson crown. And famous for the beautiful, leaping courtship dances the pairs perform, these cranes have been sacred to Tibetans for centuries, woven deep into their poetry, their songs, and their art. They were believed by some to carry the souls of the Dalai Lamas between their winter and summer residences, flying the spirit of the God King across the plateau. There is a cherished tradition that the sixth Dalai Lama, who was, remarkably, not only a spiritual leader, but a famous and beloved romantic poet, wrote a verse addressed to a white crane, asking it to lend him its wings, saying he would not fly far, but only to a certain distant place, and then return, and that the crane, in the end, pointed the way to the region where his own next reincarnation would be found. The black-necked crane is rare now, and threatened and protected today with great care. Its wetland homes are among the most precious wild places on the plateau, and the sight of the cranes returning to the Lhasa Valley each winter remains one of its quiet blessings. There is something perfectly fitting in it that the spirit bird of this sky highland is a creature that lives, as the Tibetans do, higher than almost anything else alive, and that carries, in the old stories, the very souls of the god kings between the earth and the sky. Now we come to the modern chapter, and here, more than anywhere, this film must simply try to lay out, honestly and fairly, a story over which people hold deeply and passionately opposed views, and in which it is not this film's place to tell you who is right. For most of its history, Tibet was effectively isolated and self-governing, a a Buddhist theocracy on the roof of the world, its relationship to the great empires around it, especially to China, complex, shifting, and to this day interpreted very differently by different sides. For long periods, Tibet functioned as an independent state with its own government, currency, and army. At other times, it fell under the influence or overlordship of Mongol or Chinese dynasties. Beijing today points to centuries of connection and claims Tibet as a long-standing and integral part of China. Many Tibetans, and the Tibetan government now in exile, point to long periods of genuine independence and self-rule. The history is real, it is complicated, and it is claimed with deep conviction by both sides, and the argument over it is not one that a documentary can settle. What is not in dispute is the sequence of events in the 20th century. In 1950, the year after the Communist Party won the Chinese Civil War, the People's Liberation Army entered Tibet, and the following year Tibet was formally incorporated into the People's Republic of China. Beijing has long described this as a peaceful liberation that freed ordinary Tibetans from a harsh, feudal, theocratic order in which most people were serfs bound to monasteries and nobles, and it points to the roads, schools, hospitals, and rising living standards it says it has brought to a once desperately poor region. Many Tibetans and the exile community describe those same events instead as an invasion and occupation that destroyed their independence and their way of life. Both of those accounts are held with total sincerity by millions of people. This film's task is not to adjudicate between them, but to help you understand why this place and what has happened here matters so intensely to so many. The young 14th Dalai Lama, a boy of 15 when the Chinese army arrived, thrust into full political power years early by the crisis, at first tried to find a way to coexist with the new order, even traveling to Beijing to meet Chairman Mao and negotiate a place for Tibet within the new China. But through the 1950s, trust broke down, and tensions deepened, and in March 1959, they erupted into a full uprising in Lhasa. As rumors spread that the Chinese authorities intended to seize the Dalai Lama, tens of thousands of Tibetans surrounded the Potala and his summer palace to protect him. As the uprising was crushed, the Dalai Lama, fearing for his life, made one of the most dramatic escapes of the 20th century. Slipping out of Lhasa at night in disguise, he crossed the towering Himalayas on foot and on horseback over some of the highest and most dangerous passes on Earth. Through blizzards and the constant fear of pursuit, a journey of 2 weeks that has become legendary. He reached India, exhausted, and was granted refuge. He has lived in exile ever since. For more than 60 years now, he has led his people from the Indian hill town of Dharamshala, in the foothills of the Himalayas, a place that has become, in effect, a second Lhasa. The capital of the Tibetan world in exile, its hillsides covered with monasteries and prayer flags and the homes of refugees. There he established a Tibetan government in exile, worked to preserve the religion and culture and language of his homeland, far from the plateau, and, over the decades, became one of the most recognized and admired religious figures on the planet. A Nobel Peace Prize laureate, known and loved around the world for his warmth, his humor, and his tireless message of compassion and nonviolence, carried to audiences on every continent. Around 100,000 Tibetans followed him into exile in those years and after, crossing the mountains to build a diaspora across India, Nepal, and eventually the wider world, keeping the flame of Tibetan Buddhism and identity alive far from the temples where it was born. The Dalai Lama has said, again and again, that he does not seek full independence for Tibet, but genuine autonomy within China, a middle way in which Tibetans could govern their own culture and religion while remaining part of the Chinese state. The Chinese government rejects this proposal and describes the man revered by millions as their living embodiment of compassion, as instead a dangerous separatist working to split the country. The decades since have transformed Lhasa and the plateau almost beyond recognition. And here, too, the same facts are seen through profoundly different eyes. In the great political convulsions that swept all of China in the mid-20th century, and above all during the decade of the Cultural Revolution, an enormous amount of Tibet's religious heritage was devastated. In a nationwide campaign against the Four Olds, against religion and tradition of every kind, the fury fell with particular weight on this most religious of lands. A great many of Tibet's monasteries and temples, by some counts, the overwhelming majority of the thousands that had existed, were damaged, looted, or destroyed outright. Monks and nuns were forced from religious life, and countless irreplaceable treasures, statues, scriptures, and works of art were lost, melted down, or scattered. The three great monastic universities around Lhasa were emptied and ravaged. It was, for Tibetan Buddhism, a catastrophe on the scale of the destruction of a whole civilization's memory. The Potala Palace itself, remarkably, survived largely intact, by many accounts because it was deliberately placed under protection on official orders, spared even as so much else was torn down around it. And it stands today, preserved and restored, a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1994, visited by more than 1 million people a year. But it is now, in the end, a museum. The God King it was built to house lives in exile on the far side of the Himalayas. His apartments in the palace are kept as they were, but empty, and inside the tour. As visitors are led through the golden halls and past the towering tombs, the current Dalai Lama, the 14th, the living one, goes almost entirely unmentioned, his photograph forbidden throughout the region. A palace built for a living Buddha, shown to the world with the living Buddha erased from its story. In recent decades, Beijing has poured investment into Tibet, and the change is staggering. A railway, one of the highest and most astonishing feats of engineering in the world, was driven across the frozen plateau to Lhasa, crossing passes over 5,000 meters high, its tracks laid across hundreds of kilometers of permafrost, ground that is permanently frozen and would buckle and heave if the heat of the trains were allowed to thaw it, so that engineers had to invent special cooling systems to keep the earth frozen beneath the rails. The carriages themselves are supplied with extra oxygen for passengers unused to the altitude. This railway connected the once unreachable Holy City, a place that for most of its history took months of brutal travel to reach, directly to the vast Chinese rail network, and through it to the cities of the eastern seaboard thousands of kilometers away. Highways, airports, power grids, hospitals, schools, mobile networks, and whole districts of modern concrete and glass buildings have followed. By many economic measures, incomes and living standards have risen sharply from what they were in the old, desperately poor Tibet. Beijing presents all of this: the railway, the roads, the rising incomes, the end of the old feudal order as development, modernization, and liberation. The lifting of a backward and isolated region into the prosperity of the modern world, and points to it with genuine pride. But critics, and much of the Tibetan exile community, see another story running through the very same developments. The roads and the railway that carry in tourists and investment, they argue, have also carried in wave after wave of migration from China's Han majority, merchants, workers, officials, settlers, changing the very makeup of Lhasa so that in parts of the city, with their Chinese shops and signs and language, Tibetans can feel like strangers, even a minority, in their own holy capital. The modernization, they say, has come tightly bound to political control, a heavy security presence, extensive surveillance, and significant restrictions on religious life, on the number of monks, on the study and practice of the faith, on the veneration of the exiled Dalai Lama, whose very image is banned. And the deepest fear is for the slow erosion of the intangible things, the Tibetan language, pushed toward the margins in schools and public life, the religion, managed and constrained, the whole distinct identity of a people, they worry, being gradually dissolved into the vast Chinese mainstream. Human rights organizations have raised persistent and serious concerns about these restrictions and about the treatment of those who protest them. Beijing firmly rejects these criticisms, insisting that religious freedom is protected, that Tibetan culture is cherished and preserved, and that it has brought only stability and prosperity to the region. These are not small disagreements at the edges of a settled picture. They are two fundamentally different accounts of the same place, held with total conviction by millions of people on each side. As this film is made, Lhasa is a city where gleaming new development and heavy political control exist side by side with the ancient, unbroken rhythms of pilgrimage and prayer, which continue, still. Around the Jokong and beneath the Potala, the prostrating pilgrims circling the temples as they have for over 1,000 years, whatever else has changed around them. And over all of it now hangs a single, looming question, one that gathers up this entire story, ancient and modern, into one point. What happens when the Dalai Lama dies? He is, as this film is made, a man in his 90s, having marked his 90th birthday among his people in exile. He has been the still center of the Tibetan world for his entire long life, the 14th in a line of god kings stretching back through the centuries, and the question of who comes after him has become one of the most extraordinary standoffs in the modern world. By tradition, when a Dalai Lama dies, his reincarnation is sought among children born around the time of his death, found and recognized by senior Tibetan lamas through signs and tests. But the Dalai Lama has declared that his successor will be born in the free world, outside of China's control, and that no one else has the authority to appoint him. The Chinese government, an officially atheist state, insists, remarkably, that it alone holds the authority to approve the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama, and that his successor must be found and confirmed within China, under its rules. The world may therefore face, before long, an almost surreal situation. Two rival Dalai Lamas. One, recognized by the Tibetan community and much of the Buddhist world, found and enthroned in exile, born, as the current Dalai Lama has insisted he will be, in the free world outside China's reach. And another, a different child, found and named and installed by the government in Beijing, inside China, according to its own rules and its own ceremonies, and backed by all the authority of the Chinese state. Two boys, each declared to be the same ocean of compassion returned. Two Dalai Lamas, one recognized by the faithful and one by the state, each denounced by the other side as false. It is a struggle, in the most literal sense imaginable, over the soul of Tibet, over who has the right to define, to recognize, and to inherit the spiritual heart of an entire people. And there is a chilling precedent for the fear. Years ago, when it came time to recognize the reincarnation of the Panchen Lama, the second highest figure in Tibetan Buddhism after the Dalai Lama himself, the Dalai Lama identified a young Tibetan boy. Within days, that boy and his family disappeared from public view into Chinese custody and have essentially never been seen publicly since. Beijing named its own candidate instead, who holds the title today under the Chinese state, unrecognized by most Tibetans. Many fear the same pattern, on an even greater scale, awaits the Dalai Lama's own succession. And so, as this film is made, the entire Tibetan world, inside the plateau and across the global diaspora, watches and waits, and prepares for the day the 14th Dalai Lama is gone, and this question, so long postponed, can be postponed no longer. It is a reminder that in Lhasa, uniquely among the cities of the world, the deepest questions of faith and the hardest questions of power have never been separate things. The God King was always both at once. And so, right down to this final and most delicate question, who gets to say where a soul is reborn, they remain, as they have always been here, one and the same. So stand at last on a high point above the Lhasa Valley, in the last light of the day, and look out over the place of the gods. The setting sun catches the golden roofs of the Potala and sets them blazing, high on the red hill, above the city that spreads across the valley floor. The ring of sacred mountains darkens to violet against a sky of impossible, high-altitude clarity, deepening toward the first stars. Down in the old city, around the ancient Jokong, the pilgrims are still circling, as they have all day, as they have for 1,400 years. The flow of the devout moving clockwise around the holiest temple in their world, some walking, some still prostrating full length onto the worn stones, their lips moving in prayer, the smell of juniper smoke and butter lamps drifting on the thin, cold air. Prayer flags flutter from 10,000 rooftops, sending their prayers out on the wind. And somewhere out on the darkening plateau, a black-necked crane is settling for the night on a frozen wetland, higher than almost anything else alive. None of it is decided. The great questions that hang over this place: who will govern it? Whose language its children will speak? Whose faith will fill its temples? Who will inherit the line of the God Kings? Are open, painful, and unresolved. And they weigh on the future of this ancient civilization as heavily as the mountains weigh on the plateau. No one can honestly tell you how the story of Lhasa ends. It is being written now, in ways no outsider can fully see, behind the highest mountains on earth. But this, too, is true, and it is the thing to carry away from the roof of the world. For more than 1,000 years, in the thinnest air and the highest place that human beings have ever built a great city, the people of this plateau made something extraordinary, a whole civilization out of faith. They took a harsh, cold, oxygen-starved desert of rock and grass, nearly 4 kilometers above the sea, where by every rule almost no one should be able to live at all. And they filled it with temples and monasteries and prayer, with philosophy and art and medicine and debate, with a devotion so total that pilgrims would measure out journeys of hundreds of kilometers with the length of their own bodies to reach a single sacred temple. They built a palace for a god on a hill above the clouds, and filled it with the golden tombs of kings who were believed to be mercy itself, returning again and again out of love for a suffering world. They turned the whole roof of the world into a place of prayer, every rooftop flying its flags, every river and lake and mountain made holy, every death an act of generosity, every day a turn of the wheel. And whatever the century now does to Lhasa, however the great questions of power and identity and succession are finally answered, and whoever finally answers them, that 1,000-year achievement remains. The building of the most spiritual city on earth, in the least likely place imaginable, the raising of a civilization of compassion in a desert of thin air and stone, the carving of a whole world of meaning, closer to heaven than anywhere else people have ever lived. It stands as one of the quiet wonders of what human beings are capable of, when they give themselves entirely to something greater than themselves. The mountains will not move. The pilgrims are still circling, and the golden roofs still catch the light, high on the red hill, above the place of the gods. Take a breath, the air is thin up here, so take it slowly. Stay a while. The pilgrims will keep circling the temple, and the golden roofs will keep catching the last of the light, whether the world beyond the mountains is watching or not. This has been Where on Earth. Thank you for watching, and until the next journey.